I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Val, for that prayer, and Lee for leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And again, we're glad that we're all able to come out tonight. Learning about the history of our area here, the heritage we have, enriches our lives. In one of his books, Kent Powell said that by keeping touch with our history, with the heritage that we have, enriches our lives. And so we're grateful for the rich history that we have here in this area, and for the Historical Society bringing that out, bringing the opportunity to listen and to understand and to learn about that heritage which we have. Now, one of the other historical aspects that we have to celebrate here tonight is the Huntington Glee Club. We're glad to have them here. They'll be favoring us with the song, the Utah Trail, which in a way goes along with the Cottonwood Wash and the Old Spanish Trail, which we will be hearing about tonight. So we'd like to invite them to come forward and render that song for us. Special thanks to Annette Cook for her accompanying the group.
This group was technically organized in 1919, so some of us are starting to look 100 years old.
That's the younger ones. It's all about trails tonight. If you like trails, we live in a great place. We've got wonderful variety, just a few of them. We've got the Red Hole Trail and the Blue Trail and the Black Dragon Trail. We've got the Convulsion Trail and the Depression Trail. The Dairy Trail and the Fisherman's Trail. And the Bull Pasture Trail. The Horse Thief Trail and the Jump Trail and the Devil's Racetrack. That's only a few. The trail we're going to sing about this evening does not appear on any map, however. It lives in the realm of the imagination. It's a trail where we can hide away, a trail of golden summers, and a trail where someone is waiting.
I'm going to hide away out beside that Utah trail. Moonlight as bright as day, pour out on that Utah trail. There's where I'll settle down in peace, where all is still, in a little hut just built for two, tucked away in the heart of the hills. There 'neath the skies of blue, in the golden summertime, out where all friends are true and all nature is in rhyme. Someone is waiting with a love that never fails, waiting patiently to welcome me, for out on that Utah trail. You ask me where I'm going, so early in the dawn. I'm just a traveler roving, just a roaming on. I've looked this whole world over many skies are blue in the golden summertime, out where all friends are true and all nature is in rhyme. Someone is waiting with a love that never fails, waiting patiently to welcome me for out on that Utah trail.
Thank you very much, the Glee Club. That's a very special song. I remember growing up listening to my mother play and sing that song, and it's dear to my heart. And I think it adequately describes our area here, how close we are to these trails and the history that goes along with that. We are privileged tonight to hear from one of our own, Wade Allinson, one of our local historians in the county here. Many of you are aware that Wade just recently retired after 32 years of service in law enforcement. However, he is still very active in the sheriff's posse and the search and rescue, so very active in the community affairs here. He's also been a volunteer in the public lands for over two decades, providing service to the Forest Service, the BLM, and the state lands, improving and maintaining many of the trails that we have in the county. Recently, though, he's taken a job with the State Department of Recreation. He's the director of the ORV program here in the state, a very prestigious position, and we're glad to have him down here. As I said, he's an avid historian. He's the author of the Elk Mountain Mission book, which we have back here in the back, if any of you are interested in it. And he has recently started a podcast series entitled Wading Through History. This is unraveling the stories that have shaped the Beehive State. You might talk a little bit more about that, Wade, and explain that. I found it very fascinating. And so he's here tonight to give us some information and instruction on the historical significance of Cottonwood Wash on the Old Spanish Trail. It was a destination point for travelers and one of the most documented resting places on the trail. It was used by travelers, trappers, and explorers. So we're pleased to have Wade here tonight to inform us on this site.
Do you want the back off too?
No, this is fine.
Okay. Before I start, I wrote this on the board. It's SHPO, the State Historical Preservation Office. They're having a ride. It's a back in time ride. They do one or two throughout the state. They just got through a couple months ago doing one on the railroad grade up in Corinne. And this one's going to be in our backyard. They're going to go through Lost Springs, Cottonwood Wash that we're going to talk about, Tidwell Draw we're going to talk about today. But if you're interested, it's the division I work for now is helping sponsor. I'll actually be there. I'm not speaking. I'm just going because I'm providing lunch for it. It's on October 4th. You need a UTV or an ATV to do it. And if you go to their website, you can sign up. And if you're interested, you need to sign up early because it's limited to about 30 machines. So if you're interested in that, that should be interesting to listen to somebody else's perspective. So. Okay, can everybody hear me all right? There's kind of a buzz. Hopefully that's not bugging you too bad. So I offered to do Cottonwood Canyon here last year, and I was going to do it this spring, and you might remember I did a presentation on Alfred Packer because I was kind of studying him, and Ed wouldn't let that he wouldn't let me off Cottonwood Canyon. So I was kind of hoping that would replace it, but Ed made sure we were coming back for Cottonwood. Perhaps there's no other canyon on the San Rafael Swell that is more documented for travel than this canyon right here. And I'll show you why here in a few slides. It's a very fun canyon to study. It's a great canyon to hike. And we want to talk about two aspects of it. Cottonwood Canyon, which is the canyon that comes out of the reef. And then you have Cottonwood Draw, or Cottonwood Wash, which comes out of the reef and it heads out across the desert. And both of them, we're going to talk about both of them. They're just both interconnected. So here's a map. This map is at the John Wesley Powell Museum. I stopped in there the other day, and guess what? They had a map talking about Cottonwood Canyon. And so Green River's right here, and Cottonwood Canyon and Cottonwood Wash are right up here. So if there's probably the easiest way to describe how to get there would be to go out to the corrals here in Castle Dell, take the Green River Cutoff Road, and you follow it east till you get to what's called the four-way at Tidwell Draw, and you head down, and eventually you can come out on I-70. And they also had, let me see here. I don't have it, but they have another slide right next to this kiosk at the John Wesley Powell Museum that talks all about Cottonwood Wash. So there's a little bit of prominence there. So this right here is Cottonwood Wash, and it dead ends up there. You can't get through it. And that's kind of important as we talk about Cottonwood Wash, that it dead ends right there. And this wash right here is Cottonwood Wash, and it comes out clear up there. I wanted to kind of give you a perspective of how long the wash is, and that's exactly where the trail went through. The trail followed that wash, zigzagging in and out, all the way to just about Green River. So, and I got to throw out that I did not include every person that traveled through Cottonwood Wash or Cottonwood Canyon. I just picked my favorite. And there's plenty others that I skipped over. I skipped over Jedediah Smith. We could have probably talked about him. But I just didn't throw them all in. I threw the one in I liked. We'll talk about trappers, traders. I'm going to talk about military people, religious, freighters, and other travelers to California. So before it was called the Spanish Trail, it was called the Road from Santa Fe to California. It wasn't until John C. Fremont and his expedition in 1843 that his writings, he decided to call this trail the Old Spanish Trail. Prior to that, it was the road from Santa Fe to California. So we're going to talk about Tidwell Draw. As Cottonwood Wash comes out of Cottonwood Canyon, it parallels for quite a ways Tidwell Draw. So this is the mouth of Cottonwood Canyon, and this picture really doesn't do it justice, but the reason why this is an important canyon is because of all that green stuff you see there, grass. Grass is good for horses and cattle, and there's water. And not only that, but with the mouth of this canyon, it's really hard to see. I wish I had a better picture, but it just takes very few people to close in the livestock there. So you can go there and take your cows and take your herd of horses, which the traders had, hundreds of them. They had hundreds of pack mules, horses, cattle, and they could throw them inside of that canyon, inside of Cottonwood Canyon, and they can't get out. And it takes very few people to watch up front from keeping them out. That way, they're not going to get stolen, and they're not going to get lost, and there's plenty of food, and there's plenty of water. One thing I can't prove, but I have a theory that as Chief Walker would raid Mormon livestock, I believe he would keep them and store them in here, waiting for Spanish traders and trappers to come and trade them right here. But I can't prove it, but I have a hard time getting rid of that theory. So this is looking out of Cottonwood Canyon towards the east, and you can see the water. That water there is there year-round. It's not rainwater, it's spring water. And that is another. The grass and the water are the two very important things why this canyon is so important. That's why people stop there, because you had water.
Wade, quick question, is it good water? Is it salty water?
It's drinkable. The journals I read, I read a journal last night and getting this together, and they described it as being alkali and brackish, but they drank plenty of it. Because by the time you got there, you were ready for water, and you would drink frogs with it if you had to. But yeah, not great water, but it is clear, and it is inviting to drink. But yeah, most of them describe it as pretty typical of our desert water, not real tasty. So this picture is this is Cottonwood Wash. So we're out of Cottonwood Canyon a ways. This picture is probably 3/4 of a mile to a mile outside of the wash, or outside of the canyon. And you can see all of the available water that sits in this canyon. And it doesn't really run anywhere. You just have pools of water throughout the whole canyon. And as you can see, a pool like this could sustain a lot of livestock. Same wash, just down a little further from that picture. Down a little bit further. All these little pools and pockets of water all line Cottonwood Wash. So the first group I want to talk about are the Elk Mountain Missionaries. It's well documented with the Elk Mountain Missionaries because, as the Mormons they like to keep journals. And so there were several journals of the Elk Mountain Missionaries that describe going through Cottonwood Wash. Just a brief deal on the Elk Mountain Missionaries. There was 41, and they were mostly from San Pete in Utah. And these guys were very experienced frontiersmen. Kentucky, New York, Tennessee. They left Manti on May 22nd, 1855. And some of them had histories with the Utes along the way too. As they traveled, they really documented little holes. Some of you may have been there. So as you cross the forks of the river down here of the Huntington and Cottonwood and Farron, the first one you'd come to was Little Holes. And if you were desperate enough for water, you would take a bucket and drop it down into the cliff and pull up water. That's what the Elk Mountain Missionaries did. And about another 4.5, 5 miles down the trail, you hit Big Holes. And Big Holes, both of these are not springs. They're just holding pockets of water from rain. So these could be dry or they could have water depending on the time of year. If you look right here, this is the old wagon route. It went right through here. You can kind of see that. So John McEwen, this answers your question, Roger. So I looked up his journal. June 1st, Friday, he describes Cottonwood Wash. It said, in the afternoon, resumed our journey and traveled some 5 or 6 miles. So this was from Big Holes. Road rough and rocky as a general course north and intersects Gunnison's Trail. Then some 6 miles and camped at a large creek where there was a spring that oozed from the rocks. Water very brackish or alkali, little feed, road sandy, rough, rocky in places as a general course southeast. So the Elk Mountain Missionaries did not camp at Cottonwood Canyon, but they camped in Cottonwood Wash. That's why they talk about lots of water, but the feed was a little more scarce. Gunnison's expedition, 1853. This is a big one. Gunnison when Gunnison came through, there was a lot of speculation that Gunnison went through Lost Springs and not through Cottonwood Wash. And for years, many scholars believed that was the case. And having been out there for several times, riding and exploring, I had to ask myself, why would anybody go down Lost Springs? Very little water, virtually no feed. It's rough, it's rocky. From my perspective of being out there, it made absolutely no sense to go down Lost Springs when you had Cottonwood Wash that was full of water. So this guy here, he solved the mystery. This is Richard Kern. He was Gunnison's artist. And just a couple of weeks after they came through here, he was killed at Gunnison Bend on the Sevier River, as we all know as the Gunnison Massacre. But fortunately, some of his sketches survived. A little more background on him. He also traveled with Fremont. He also had a brother that also traveled with Fremont. And he was killed on October 26, 1853. The Paiute shot him with a rifle and killed him. But one day, I was given a presentation for the Oregon Trail, the Oregon California Trail Association. And this professor come up to me, and he was out of Oklahoma, and he said, I have a sketch, and the sketch is the one on the left. And you can see the date. It's October 2nd. And he said, I have a sketch that was drawn by Kern. And he said, could you find that? And I said, sure. He said, send it to me. So he sent me 2 sketches that Kern made. This one, and Kern labeled it Idle Rock. And I went out right by Cottonwood Wash, just a little couple hundred yards south of it. And I found Idle Rock. The other sketch, and that's how I found it. I'm taking the picture of this from Cottonwood Wash. I'm on the bank of Cottonwood Wash, and I look over, and I can see that pinnacle there. And that was my view of it. And then he gave me another one, and it's labeled Head Rock. And I was able to find that one as well. These 2 sketches he found in a library in Albany, the New York State Library. He found them in New York. They had never been published. And I don't know how, well, you got to figure a lot of these guys that were coming through here with the military and with Gunnison, they were all from back east. So when they kept their pictures and their journals, those historical societies back there would end up with them. And somehow the New York State Library ended up with a picture of this feature right above Cottonwood Wash. And this really proves that Gunnison did not go through Lost Springs, but he went through Cottonwood Wash. Otherwise, he would have never seen Head Rock or Idle Rock. And the BLM has a kiosk now. I gave him a copy of this picture. And at the bottom of this feature right here on the road is a kiosk, and you can read all about it and look up and see the sketch that Kern made and look up and see the feature. I throw this one in just because it's not down there, Cottonwood Wash, but I cannot not talk about it. October 12th, Kern does another sketch. This one is out past Emery. It's just a little past Quitchenpaw. And this professor gave me this sketch too and asked me if I could find it. And if you go down the highway, take your time and look to the west, and you'll see that feature plain as day. You can see the pinnacle right here that he drew. And here's the pinnacle right here. Here's the butte, and there's the butte. So that had nothing to do with Cottonwood Wash, but it's pretty cool. Next time you drive by there, stop and take a look. You'll see it.
Just past the coal yard.
Yes, go, yep.
Past the coal yard and look west.
Yep, go past the coal yard and look in there. You'll see it, but there's just a small window of seeing it. But it's really quite cool to look over there and see that. And I believe he drew that because that's where the trail went. They had no GPSs. They had, they did fairly well on miles, but that wasn't overly accurate. But what was undisputable was features. That's why Kern drew Idle Rock, Head Rock, and Netherly's Needle. And he drew a couple other sketches that actually have been published. One's in Farron. And literally, you could follow Kern's sketches all the way down to Salina. And then at Salina, they ended because he was killed shortly after that. So I want to talk about some of the Army expeditions that came through there. We actually talked about Gunnison. We're going to talk a little bit about Colonel Loring in 1858. He kept a daily journal. Well, one of his men did. Lieutenant Du Bois is actually the one that kept the journal. But the 5th, the 7th, and the 10th Infantry came through here in 1860. We'll talk a little bit about that. And Bill came through here in 1853, and I'm not going to talk about Bill because I ran out of time, but these other ones will be fun. So I want to show you the picture of this guy right here. His name is Martin Mullins. He was a sergeant major in the 5th Infantry, Company G. And he had a brother named Francis Mullen. I couldn't find a picture of Francis, but I was able to find a picture of his brother, Martin. And I want you to keep that in mind. So this is the description I found of Frank Mullins. He was a first sergeant in the 5th. And keep in mind, the 5th Infantry, they were out at Camp Floyd because they came here in 1858, and they eventually settled Camp Floyd. He was part of Johnson's army that came to squash the rebellion of the Mormons up in Salt Lake. They ended up in Camp Floyd, and while in Camp Floyd, he met a girl. Her name is Ellen Foy. Ellen's father was a musician in Company G, and Frank, when they get near Santa Fe, and so what happened is in 1860, the 5th, the 7th, and officers of the 10th Infantry, they were ordered to leave Camp Floyd. And when they left, they split up. Half of them went up Spanish Fork Canyon, and I believe that's how Soldier Summit got its name, is from the 5th Infantry. A lot of folklore out there that there was 5 or 6 that left to join the Civil War. I don't think so. I think it came because this is documented. This is documented that the 5th Infantry came up there. Then they also, half of them went through Sanpete County. And Peacock, what was Bishop Peacock's name over there? Do you remember, Ed? Was it George? Was it George Peacock?
He was the judge. He was not a bishop.
So Peacock keeps a journal. And he writes in his journal, there's a book called Train Tracks and Rattlesnakes. Very good book if you want to get it. It's very hard to get. But he writes in his journal about the 5th Infantry coming through Manti. Prior to that, reading that book, the only thing I knew is that the 5th Infantry went up Spanish Fork Canyon and down. But they didn't. They split. Half went through Sanpete, half went up Spanish Fork, and they all converged on the Green River. So Frank, just before they get to Santa Fe, his girlfriend, Ellen Foy, says, I'm going to break up with you. And keep in mind, when the Army was traveling, they had their families. A lot of them had families. You had people selling liquor. You had people selling supplies. I estimated this caravan of Army in 1860 coming through Emery County was probably around 2,000 people. And if you can see how far that was stretched with wagons and horses, and these guys were on foot because they were infantry, this wagon train was probably 1 mile or 2 miles long. But anyway, back to Frank. Ellen breaks up with Frank, and Frank kills Ellen, and then Frank commits suicide. So one day I was hiking in Cottonwood Wash, or actually Cottonwood Canyon, and I come out of the canyon and I got drawn to this side wash that's a tributary to it. And I looked up at the rock. I could see there was a little water there. And I look up and I see this. Company G, 5th Infantry with a chevron, a sergeant's chevron insignia there. And I really didn't know what I had there. And I sent it to my Sunday school teacher. He was a historian for the church. And he sends it to a guy by the name of Bill McKinnon. Bill McKinnon is probably the foremost scholar on the Utah War. Bill McKinnon emails me back and he says, "You got the 5th Infantry." I said, "Well, tell me more." And he told me what I just told you, and he said, the guy who wrote that is Francis Mullins, because he was the sergeant there in Company G, 5th Infantry. So what's interesting is Frank Mullins writes his name in our rock in Cottonwood Canyon, and less than 2 weeks later, he shoots his girlfriend and kills himself. This one's a little harder to see, but if you see this one, you can see the JM, and you can see U.S. Army. So this one is probably about 10 feet from where Francis Mullins wrote his name, and this is John McCarty. And John was, if we don't know really who JM is, but I researched the initials of JM in the 5th Infantry, Company G, and it came back to John McCarty, and he was a flute player for the 5th Infantry. Now, could there be a JM that was in the 7th Infantry that was following them? Maybe. But it's probably a good bet that was him. He was a private. So the next one I want to talk about is William Wing Loring. So William Loring is a veteran of the Mexican-American War. In Mexico City, his arm was shot off, and in 1858, he came to support Johnson's army. Johnson's army was up on the plains of Wyoming. It was winter, and the Mormon militia was having their way with them, and they needed help. So they requested help. So Colonel Loring came with the 2nd Dragoons, and he followed Johnson's army into Salt Lake and out to Camp Floyd. And then in 1858, when they get to Camp Floyd, they get settled in, and he's called to go back to New Mexico to Fort Garland. An interesting point on him is he was a Confederate general in 1861. And I read recently that that part of his bones was, there was a statue of him in Florida, a Confederate statue, and they tore it down, and underneath it was part of his bones. So Colonel Loring had a very talented artist with him. His name was Joseph Hager. And I didn't include this sketch, but this is the only sketch I know of Manti. And Joseph, he drew this sketch. And what's interesting is, remember that needle that I showed you, that Kern drew? Joseph also drew the same needle. So that tells you how important Netherly's needle was. 2 armies, two privates drew it 2 years apart, the same. But anyway, I find the fort interesting. You can look, you got the houses around about, and this is the round, I think, did they call that a caston? Anyway, that's where they would shoot out of. You can read journals and they talk about that fort. But I don't know of any other sketches, but Hager is a pretty fun kid to study. So Loring leaves Camp Floyd on July 19th, 1858. He's headed back to Fort Union. And here's what's interesting about him. He had a guide named Anton Leroux. And Anton Leroux is like my favorite mountain man. He was a French Canadian, and I'm going to talk more about him. But Anton Leroux is the one that's going to guide him on the Old Spanish Trail. So he had a few rifle companies with him. He had 50 wagons and over 300 troopers going with him. He wanted to go up Spanish Fork, but he had Anton Leroux, and he said, let's go around and we'll go up the Old Spanish Trail. He's in Salina on July 26, 1858. Now, as you go up Salina Canyon, you look at that dominant peak. Some people call it Mary's Nipple. Some people call it on the map, it's Musania Peak. It's that very dominant one. We see it when we're going this way, and you look up on the Manti and you see that dominant peak. Well, the original name of that is Anton LaRoe Peak. It just never made it to the maps. So Colonel Loring, he's at the mouth of Cottonwood Canyon on August 10th, 1858. And here's what Loring reports of Cottonwood Canyon. He said that the water source is permanent and it could hold a small attachment. And then the following day, Loring's on the Green River. So this is the only sketch I know of Anton LaRoe. We're going to talk about him for a minute. The cool thing about Anton LaRoe is he had a history already with the Mormons before he came here with Johnson's army. 1846, he was a guide for the Mormon battalion. So isn't that a turnaround for him? He's guiding the Mormon battalion in 1846, and then in 1858, he's guiding the U.S. Army here in Utah to go after the Mormons. And the other interesting thing is we talked about, Gunnison coming through. He actually guided Gunnison on his expedition right up to the border of Utah and Colorado. And then he had a prior commitment, and he had to turn around and leave and go back to New Mexico. So he was also part of the Gunnison expedition. And I couldn't help but think if Anton LaRoe would have stayed with Gunnison, that there probably would not have been the Gunnison massacre. I just think that he was smart enough and had enough sense as a mountain man here for over 2 decades before he ever guided him, that I think he probably could have kept Gunnison and his men alive. So Gunnison had a scientist with him. His name was Schill, and this is how he describes Anton LaRoe. He said, one of the best mountaineers alive, came up from Taos with some companions to guide us through the Sierra, San Juans, in the Green River region, as far as the so-called Spanish Trail. And the cool thing about Anton LaRoe, so that same professor that gave me those sketches, he was in the Huntington Library in California, and he's reading this journal, and inside the journal is this map folded up. And it's believed that this is the map that when Anton left Gunnison, he drew a map of where to go. And you can see right here the San Rafael River, first branch and second branch. And he's got the Spanish Trail coming down through here, right into Salina Canyon. He's got the Green River right here. And that's why it's supposed that this map came from Anton. I don't believe Anton could write, but I think he described it and somebody else wrote it. But it starts right here where he left. It starts right on the border of Utah and Colorado. So Anton, he knew of Cottonwood Wash. So the fun part about Cottonwood Wash are the traders and the freighters. This guy right here is really fun to study. If any of you listen to my podcast, it's called Wading Through Utah History. I have a whole podcast on this guy right here, Joe Ney. And you can see he put his name in axle grease right there. And this is his wife, Helen. And Joe, as a teenager, he was 17 years old. Him and another guy robbed the train at Thompson Springs. They took some of the loot, they buried it on the desert, and then they went up to Ogden and they started bragging about it in a bar in Ogden. The Weber sheriff got a hold of the information and ended up arresting him. And he did some actually went to prison, did some prison time. Come out and reformed quite well. This lady right here was probably the first female millionaire of Nevada. She had several mines. In fact, there's a book called A Mine of Her Own, and it's all about this lady right here. And her name is Ellen up there, but it's Mary Ellen. So he was a fun guy to study. Not only that, if you listen to my podcast, he had 2 uncles that were also train robbers. They robbed the Montello train out on the border of Nevada and Utah, and they did prison time as well. So The Ney family is pretty dominant on the other side of the mountain in Gunnison, all the way down through, all the way to Kanab, actually. Just before you get to Panguitch, on the left-hand side of the road, you'll see Ney Brothers Meatpacking. Same family. Also, so Cottonwood Wash, the freighters that were going through, they were carrying supplies for the railroad grade, and they were carrying supplies to Colorado. So what they would do is they would stop and water their horses, and of course those old wagons, you had to grease those wheels frequently, otherwise they would squeak. So every wagon had a bucket of grease hanging off the axle or inside of it. Most of the time they were hanging off the axle. So as these freighters would let their horses water, they would reach their fingers down with and get the axle grease, and they would write their names on the sides of the rock there. This is Arthur Barney. The one on the left's in Cottonwood Wash, but the one on the right is actually in Salina Canyon up Clear Creek. I just put that in there to show you how well Arthur Barney traveled. This inscription in 1878, he wrote that the day he was taking the McCartys. We all know Tom McCarty Canyon out here on the desert. The McCartys were going from Grass Valley to the LaSalles, and Arthur Barney keeps a journal of him being hired by the McCartys to take them to the LaSalles. So I find that quite interesting. And this is Arthur Barney. That's his wagon. That picture was taken out in Uinta Basin, but that's Arthur. Another one of my favorite in Cottonwood Wash is Joseph Chugg. He was an interesting one to study. These guys right here, you see Joseph Draper and Josiah Draper. Do you remember the lady, Lee, here in Castle Dell that was the Draper lady that lived on the hill? Leona?
No. Julie, what was her name?
Bud and Leona? Leona. Anyway, she ties into Joseph Draper. Just an interesting fun fact. Husband. But she's the one I talked to. Her husband was dead when I went and interviewed her. But you look at this is 1888 stuff. J.D. West, you can see his name right here.
Mendora.
J.D. West. He wrote his name there in Cottonwood Wash. J.D. West would go on to settle out in the Uinta Basin, and he would actually serve some jail time for selling alcohol to the Indians. This is a fun one here. It's hard to read this one, but basically you can read right here, The Woods at Green River, April 10th, 87, and it's a visor is the name. It's hard because most of it's gone, but what I believe it's a message left saying we'll meet you at the woods of the Green River, and they dated it April 10th, 1887. Jay Bingham, a fun one to study. Jay wrote his name in August 9th, 1887. And if you go past Cane Springs, and as you climb out of Cane Springs by just south of Moab, he writes his name in the rock about 4 days later down there. So you can follow Jay all the way through Emery County and through Grand County. So we're going to move inside of the canyon. So we're going to go up inside of the canyon quite a ways. Up there, there's a M.L. Marsing. We've talked about the Marsings here before. And that is Martin Luther Marsing, brother of Alma Marsing. He left his name in there. Also in Cottonwood Wash, there's two guys that are very interesting that left their name. So this guy, J.A. Smith, I found his name first in Cottonwood Wash. And then I went to the Price River and found his name, J.A. Smith, on the Price River. So this guy went to the Price River and then came south on Chimney Rock Flat to Cottonwood Wash and wrote his name there on the same trip. You can see his name right here. So these are some Indian writings in Cottonwood Wash or Cottonwood Canyon. You can see him right here, and he writes his name right across them. I had to highlight him with my computer so you could see it. So he had a traveling companion, and this guy I found really interesting. His name is Jasper Conrad, and Jasper Conrad is on the middle row. So you got William Kimball, Song. So he's this guy. He's this guy right here. And he comes back to Emery County with J.A. Smith, but he was also a Black Hawk Indian fighter. And this is a picture of his group of guys that fought. And what's interesting, and this is Jasper, but what's interesting, if you read his service record for the Black Hawk Indian War, guess where he served? Manti. And where do those guys from Manti go? Those guys from Manti chased Black Hawk and his raiders all the way through Emery County. So I believe Jasper Conrad was here in 1866 and again in 1881. So I just wanted to kind of show you some of the real cool, if you ever want to go hiking inside Cottonwood Canyon, there is some really amazing rock art in Cottonwood Canyon. I just threw a couple of my favorite ones. I really like this one because it's the hunter. You can see him here with his maybe a bow or an adelanto or a spear, and he's hunting all these sheep. So that one's one of my favorite. And then some more sheep. And that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Bart.
Where does the west end of Cottonwood Wash come out?
It comes out, I think comes out by Prickly Pear Flat. But you cannot get through it. I hear you can hike the rim of Cottonwood Wash, and I tried it once, but it comes out at the top of there. And I've been up to the very end of the canyon, and it's all rocked in. But that's where it comes out, is right there. I've never come all the way through it, but that's where it comes out.
So did they come up Cottonwood Wash and then move over to Cottonwood Canyon?
Yes. So
Cottonwood Canyon come out?
Cottonwood Canyon comes out into Tidwell Draw, and Cottonwood Wash parallels Tidwell Draw. Now, Tidwell Draw runs all the way to I-70. It dumps into the San Rafael River and goes and combines with the San Rafael River. But Cottonwood Wash separates from Tidwell Draw after it comes out of Cottonwood Canyon about a mile, mile and a half. Cottonwood Wash separates and starts heading due east, while Tidwell Draw heads due south. And the travelers were headed east and not south, so that's why they would have stayed in Cottonwood Wash, because of the water, and it sets them up for hitting Green River.
Okay, well, I'm not sure where Tidwell.
So if you go out, if you go out on the road here, you go out to the Green River Cutoff Road, right? And you just keep going east. Yep. Yeah, before you get to Highway 6, there's a four-way. It's called the Not So Grande four-way. It's where Dean King's cabin is. At that four-way, if you go north, you hit the Price River. If you go south, you hit Cottonwood Wash.
So wait, does the rock house have anything to do with
Yeah.
Cottonwood?
What's that?
Does the rock house, the rock cabin there, have anything to do with?
No, I think it was built later. It's just a cool landmark to see, Dean King's old rock house there.
And what about the Smith homestead at the bottom of it? Is that part of the Smiths?
Yes, that is Wayne and Betty Smith, and that's who Dean King bought his holdings from, was Wayne and Betty. And I think, I'm not sure, Dean might have been related to either.
To the Smith?
Yes. Yep. And the Smith's cabin is literally right in Tidwell Draw. The Smith's cabin is only about less than a mile from Cottonwood Wash. So it's in a very strategic place too for water. Yeah, Roger.
Is there documentation? We see the little monuments of the Spanish Trail, clear over to Richfield there.
Uh-huh.
Is there very good documentation of where the exact route is and what, we got these Cottonwood Wash and all these people that came through, so you found information there. Is there more to the Spanish Trail than we know about?
Yeah, so really, there was a guy that came through here. His name was Orville Pratt. He came through here in 1848, and he left. They call him the diarist, and he left. And I don't know how he got his miles straight, because he wasn't in a wagon. He was on horses, but he left a mile by mile. And then we just have to assume that people like Gunnison in 1853, the Elk Mountain Missionaries in 1855, we have to assume when they went through here, they followed the old Spanish Trail. Because, it doesn't matter what year it is, it's the path of least resistance, water and food. And so you have to take it on good faith that Gunnison was on top of the old Spanish Trail. And he was the first one to take wagons through it. And then the Elk Mountain Missionaries brought their wagons through it. And then the next group was Colonel Loring to bring his wagons through. Then the next group was the 5th Infantry. So by 1860, you probably had almost 200 to 300 wagons that had traveled this section of the old Spanish Trail. So by 1860, I would propose that that trail was pretty well beaten in. Prior to that, prior to the wagons, it was probably a series of trails just within a corridor. It was probably cows wandering to pick food here and pick food there, but all traveling through here. Down below us in Farron, you can read accounts of where Colonel Loring actually camped at Paradise. He spent a day in Paradise, a day and a night in Paradise. Okay, well, thank you.